I'm gonna be brutally honest here. Iron Man's death was the best thing to happen to the MCU. Wait, just stop. Please hear me out. I'll tell you why right now. I'm not saying Tony Stark was an outright villain, but let's just say he made a lot of mistakes in his life. And I'm not even talking about the full-fledged arms dealer he was in the past. I'm referring to his time as one of Earth's mightiest heroes. Yes, I'm heartbroken that he died, and years from now, when I'm sitting on my psychiatrist's couch and my doctor asks me to recall a painful memory, I'm going to think of Tony snapping those fingers and saving the entire universe. So, yes, I'm still very much upset about his passing, but there's a tiny little voice in my head. You know, the one deep down that whispers things like telling me to speed through that yellow light or to take 2 free samples instead of just 1? Yeah, it's telling me that the MCU might just be a safer place now that Tony Stark is in the giant scrap metal yard in the sky. So, yes, although my heart feels like there's a giant hole in it the size of an arc reactor, I still look at things like Ultron, the Sokovia Accords, and the countless villains he seems to create every other day, all thanks to his cocky arrogance. And I think things might actually be a little bit more peaceful now. Or at least our heroes will be fighting something that Tony Stark didn't outright cause. The guy did a lot of good in the world, more than you or me will certainly ever do, but it's difficult to overlook his more egregious mistakes. Let's dig into Tony's history and examine just how many troubling scenarios were a result of Tony's own mistakes. Yes, in the first movie, Obadiah Stane was the main baddie, and Tony Stark didn't really make him evil or anything, but the Ten Rings terrorist group that kidnapped him were certainly able to do more damage, all thanks to Stark weaponry. And yes, right off the bat, that's not really fair. Tony was still an amoral jerk at that point and hadn't started his journey toward universe saver, so it's not a total knock against him, but it does set up the pattern of Tony's past actions really causing a great deal of damage in the present. You'd think for someone whose past self has caused a lot of problems for his future self, he'd be a little bit more careful. Because let's look at all the villains that Tony Stark has had a hand in creating. He embarrassed Aldrich Killian so badly that Killian helped develop the Deadly Extremis project, which resulted in the creation of the fake terrorist persona, the Mandarin. Like, what would have happened if Tony wasn't a jerk to Aldrich on New Year's that one year? Iron Man 3 might have just consisted of Tony celebrating a quiet Christmas with Pepper. Kinda sounds a little boring, but can you imagine what the holiday party at the Stark Mansion would have been like? But again, this was all past Tony, so can you really blame him? Well, Tony did also create a lot of villains after he entered into full hero mode as well. Let's not forget Vulture, whose livelihood in construction was completely destroyed after the Battle of New York. Vulture, real name Adrian Toombs, owned a salvage company, and you'd think that a salvage company would do insanely well in a city that just underwent an alien attack. But things didn't work out that way. Tony insisted on creating his own damage control company in order to clean up the mess. In Tony's mind, it must have been the right thing to do, but it totally shut out Toombs' company, which made a lot of people lose their jobs. And keeping with Spider-Man villains, look at Mysterio, who according to him helped create the augmented reality equipment seen in Captain America: Civil War. Mysterio envisioned this new breakthrough to have limitless applications, but Tony took it and focused it on a self-therapy machine. Yeah, I'd be pretty mad too. If that wasn't enough, Mysterio teamed up with a huge number of disgruntled former Stark employees to cause a lot of mayhem. Now, what's more likely? That Tony just has the literal worst hiring manager ever at Stark Industries? Or that these were all good people working for a massive egomaniac who drove them to a life of crime? Yeah, knowing Tony, the second option actually seems pretty likely. But those are all villains that Tony inadvertently created out of mostly carelessness and a lack of foresight. What about the baddies and the troubling situations he created on purpose? Of course, the prime example here is Ultron. The James Spader-sounding super evil robot was the first thing that Tony created that really gave us insight into his way of thinking. Tony was sure something big was coming, and he wanted to be prepared no matter what. Ultron was supposed to represent a global security force that would stop any problem and defend Earth if necessary. Of course, things didn't work out so great. Ultron was created, and it took all of about 2 seconds for him to become a crazed, homicidal force of evil that very quickly threatened to wipe out all of humanity. And even if he's not creating villains, it's this notion of wanting to protect the Earth before threats happen that really cloud his judgment. This idea is what caused Tony to push for the Sokovia Accords, which would give a special government the power to tell them where to go and when to deploy. Yeah, Tony, I know Civil War was supposed to have us see both sides, but Captain America had a very valid point about wanting to save people, while you just seemed guilty over the whole Ultron thing. Tony is so obsessed with the idea of stopping threats before they happen that it often causes even worse situations. All of this would make us worried what Tony would do the next time aliens came a knockin' to planet Earth, with the shape-shifting Skrulls already having a presence on Earth. But do you really expect Tony to act rationally during this? What would the guy who has feared an alien invasion for years and was just proven right by Thanos coming do if he found out that a lot of people could be Skrulls in disguise? We imagine a ton of distrust on his part that leads to innocent people being unfairly accused and detained, all in the name of safety. All of these examples are forgivable to an extent, and I have to admit that they have made for some really entertaining movies. But if I'm being honest, I'm much more inclined to believe that Earth and the MCU will be a little safer now that Tony is gone, which I know is an awful thing to admit. But I also wonder how many villains are still going to pop up as a result of Tony's actions. I'd say we'll see about 17 more. That sounds right, 17. But let's take a step back and talk about how Tony Stark's death is actually a big help for the MCU on a story level. Because let's face it, Tony Stark was a black hole. And I don't mean that in a bad way. He's actually the best black hole ever. He sucked us in with his charisma and charm, and now it's hard to live without him. We as fans wanted more and more Iron Man, but he had a tendency to steal the spotlight away from other heroes in the MCU. Like, even when it's not his movie, Iron Man's infectious energy usually overshadows everything else. The first example of this is in Captain America: Civil War, which, although Cap's name is in the title, it's still very much an Iron Man movie. Like, Captain America has 38 minutes of screen time in that film. At that point, the movie should have been called Captain America and Iron Man Punch Their Feelings. And this wouldn't be the last time Iron Man hijacked another hero's movie. Obviously, just take a look at the Spider-Man franchise to see how much of an impact Tony Stark has on a narrative. The marketing of the film sold Spidey's first solo film in the MCU as a team-up movie, with the trailers famously ending with Iron Man and Spider-Man swinging and flying side by side with each other through New York. In reality, Iron Man has just under 8 minutes of screen time in the movie, and yet his minor presence feels so large. Spider-Man is constantly trying to get a hold of Tony, while Adrian Toomes is basically an Iron Man villain who has to deal with the annoying side character Spider-Man. Now, we don't blame the marketing for highlighting Iron Man's role in the film. There was a lot riding on the success of Spider-Man: Homecoming, and at the time, Iron Man was the MCU's poster boy. Of course they were going to highlight his role in the movie, but that's sort of the problem. Iron Man had become so popular that he drew attention away from everyone else. He basically overshadowed Peter's growth as a character in his first movie. Even in Spider-Man: Far From Home, Iron Man cast a huge shadow over the narrative of the film, where Peter was once again fighting a villain that Tony Stark had created. Hopefully now, Peter can start to grow on his own and not focus on becoming the next Iron Man. Well, at least until Sony and Disney have another breakup and Peter leaves the MCU again. So it's a good thing that Iron Man is gone, in order to help characters like Spider-Man grow up a little bit. Can you imagine if he survived Endgame? Spider-Man would have had a drastically different second movie. So it was right for the MCU to end Iron Man's story with Endgame, because what would he have done afterwards? I know there was a vocal set of fans who wanted to see Tony Stark become the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and lead from the background, much like Nick Fury did, but that's part of the problem. Any movie that included Tony Stark moving to a supporting role would quickly overshadow any of the main action of the film. Don't get me wrong, if Tony Stark was still alive and somehow moved into a permanent supporting role as he mentors the new Avengers, I'd be more excited than Rocket Raccoon eyeing Bucky's arm. But deep down, I know that's not what the MCU needs right now. Avengers Endgame closed the book on this chapter of the MCU. These 3 phases were all one big story. Tony Stark started it all, and it was fitting that he ended it. We're now in completely new territory with a whole new roster of Avengers on their way to take the torch and continue the fight against evil. But these newbies need to escape the shadow of the Titans that came before. To fully have a fresh start, they needed to take our favorites like Iron Man and Captain America off the board. But where Captain America's goodbye fills us with happiness that he finally was able to relax and share a dance with his true love, Tony's death makes us a little relieved that he won't be around to cause trouble anymore. To borrow from another superhero franchise, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become a villain. Although Iron Man made some questionable decisions, he was still able to go out on top. He saved the universe by sacrificing himself, and there's no greater achievement a hero could ask for. But it's a good thing his reign ended here. Any longer and he might have done some more serious damage. I heard he had an Ultron version 2 in his garage and was just waiting for a chance to turn it on. Plus, I also heard he was getting ready to fire his top scientist, some goofy fellow by the name of Otto Octavius, and I'm not a rocket scientist, but I think those are both 2 horrible ideas for the future. Even though it's sad, I do think Iron Man is better off dead than alive. What about you? Do you wish Iron Man was still alive? Let us know in the comments down below. And be sure to hit that subscribe button for more awesome MCU content. Thanks for watching CBR.